moving from one conflict to another. A new battle of Kursk. The Russia-Ukraine war heats up. Glenn, your family has fought many wars over the centuries, and you've been on the winning side. I'm a mere Rajput. We've been on the losing side of history. So why don't you paint us a picture of what is going on?
Great. Well, I'm a strong supporter of the independence of and territorial integrity of Ukraine, which is the victim, the innocent party in this, defending its right to exist. And so, as we all know, Ukraine has launched an incursion into the Kursk region of Russia, which is just across the Ukrainian border, obviously. And they have succeeded in conquering or liberating or occupying 1,000 square kilometers of Russia, and slowly increasing each day, and taking several thousand Russian soldiers prisoner. The Russian response has been slow, disorganized, feckless, and ineffective, but probably intentional.
Just like 1941.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, and Russia's greatest military asset is its geography.
I always jokingly say that the operative question at the start of any war with Russia really is it 1917 or is it 1941? Because in 1917, the Romanovs collapsed, and we saw the birth of USSR. Eventually, of course, after a period of civil war, the Bolsheviks emerged triumphant, and you had Lenin and Trotsky, and eventually the monster Stalin. And that was all thanks to 1917. In 1941, they began ridiculously badly. In fact, Stalin disappeared for days and made every stupid decision you can imagine. And yet, they were able to come back. So the operative question always is it 1917 or is it 1941?
Well, it's certainly not 1917, and there was no 1917 without a 1914 to 17.
Correct.
And before that, 1905.
That's correct.
Russia had known 15 years of cataclysm, which so weakened the state that...
very quickly, 1905 is when Russians lost to the Japanese. That's the first time a European nation lost to an Asian nation.
In one of, I think, what was the largest battle in human history until that time, where there were hundreds of thousands of men killed in the Battle of Mukden. But we're taking ourselves a little on a tangent, fascinating as it is to me. So Ukraine has had great success in this incursion. It's a substantial one. It's not just a raid. And they give all appearances of intending to hold the Russian territory. And they've almost been explicit in saying that this is a bargaining chip for a future negotiation, which one obviously could say, well, we'll give you yours back if you give us ours back. So this is certainly a partial success. The Ukrainians have taken the initiative in the war. They've put the Russians on the back foot. They've reinvigorated support in the West, which is existentially central to the continuous existence of Ukraine. So from all those points of view, this has been a resounding success. They are creative, dynamic, skilled. But in the larger scheme, will it achieve anything? And I think, well, I've just said things that it has achieved. But I think it is true that Putin and the Russian military have been typically sluggish and not particularly impressive in their response. However, I also think it's intentional, and that Putin's no fool, and that he realizes that Russia crosses 17 time zones or something, and that this is a minuscule part of land, and it doesn't matter in the strategic perspective for Russia, because Russia continues to slowly grind ahead in the east of Ukraine, and it hasn't the Ukrainian incursion has not obliged Russia to substantially reconfigure its forces in a way that would stop continued Russian assaults. So I think that Ukraine's attack has provided a positive element for the Ukrainians to use, but that it has not fundamentally changed the dynamic, which is that Russia has 140 million people, Ukraine 40. Russia has 20% of Ukraine. Ukraine has 0.0067% of Russian territory, and that absent U.S. and NATO support, Ukraine, unfortunately, Putin is correct, could not sustain the conflict for long. So, this is the one where this is one of the three topics I mentioned where I'm on the somewhat pessimistic side. It all comes down to sustained Western support, I think.
So, Glenn, I'm very glad you mentioned that, because that is the point. That is the conversation we were having when preparing for this FO exclusive. I take the view that Russia is a fortress economy. Russia has land, which is fertile. Russia can grow its food. Russia has enough water. Russia has enough natural gas, which you need to put into tanks and planes and ships and submarines. Russia has, well, fewer people than it did. Russian women are not having as many children as they did in 1941, but it's got enough people to fight. Russia doesn't care about casualties. Russia can produce defense stuff. It may not be the best in class like some of the American kit, but it is good enough. And therefore, Russia can prosecute a war forever. It's a fortress economy. In fact, look at the Russian economy, it's growing. Look at the Ukrainian economy, it's created by 30%. Ukraine is completely dependent on Western support. Money, arms, kit, you name it. And so the day the Western voter, or let's say the American voter, tires of supporting the war in a faraway place and starts moaning about the taxes that are being wasted in an unending war, the Ukrainian story is up. The Ukrainians are up shit creek without a paddle. And even the new Kursk, the battle for Kursk, the new battle for Kursk, I have a feeling it's not as spectacular as the German invasion, but I have a feeling that this invasion could end up really badly for the Ukrainians. What if the Russians do a pincer movement and then surround the Ukrainian troops who are in Russian territory? Then it'll be a turkey shoot. So I take the view that Ukraine is under duress. Ukraine is likely to come off worse in this battle, that Russia will retain its gains and most of the coastline. Russia would ideally like to have Odessa and reduce Ukraine to a rump state. Maybe it won't achieve it because it has to cross a big river. But the future certainly looks dark for Ukraine because it's a meat grinder. It's a battle of attrition, and Russia has more guns and more people.
I agree with part of that. I think it is a meat grinder and attrition. I think it unlikely the Ukrainians would be caught in a pincer, but they may not stay in the Kursk region. But I think the fundamentals are we're hearing repeated stories from Washington that the Western allies, which fundamentally is the United States, but not only, it's NATO allies too, are
the Brits are pretty active in Ukraine.
Inclining to a negotiated settlement, and that would accept the loss of some Ukrainian territory. And we hear some reports also from Moscow that the Russian leadership is leaning to a similar kind of solution, which sort of just recognizes the
Status quo.
the status quo. Um, Both sides would vehemently deny that. I hope that is not true, but that is certainly the simplest solution. Things remain dynamic, but at the same time, that is the trend. So I think the Kursk incursion has been brilliant and successful, but may not change it's a nominator issue instead of a denominator issue.
I I agree that the most likely end is some kind of negotiated status quo, and it could all be over by November or certainly by next year. And I'm going on a limb here, and my thinking is based on our FOI partners. FOI is a geopolitical and political risk advisory, and our managing partner Sanjay Acharya has been mapping the conflict pretty closely and looking at the numbers. And our other partner Manu Sharma has been reading a lot of chatter in Russian. He is a Russian speaker, so he's been following that. And it seems to be the case that the war as it is unsustainable, particularly for Ukraine. And so the onus is on Washington in particular, but also Western capitals. Note that the AfD is riding really high in the upcoming state elections. A couple of states in Germany, Länder as they are called, the entire country, but it's a federal state, and so there are Baden-Württemberg, there is Thuringia, there is yada yada, and two states. I won't bore you with details. AfD is in the lead, and given the political developments in Europe, I think a lot of political leaders would find that it is in their interest to conclude a speedy peace, and so we probably will have a negotiated settlement at some point. And I think the Ukrainians are making a play for some quid pro quo, that, okay, we hold some Russian territory, so you give us some in return. And the Russians are going to eat as much territory as they can so that they can then hardball the Ukrainians in negotiations. And I think that is the play at the moment.
I would think, and I've not done a rigorous analysis of this next point, but if the Ukrainians are able, as they progressively appear able to be, to strike deep within Russia, and they target, as they have begun to do so with effect, the Russian oil producing and gas producing capabilities, in particular around Moscow, because that would be all the more noticeable. That would, I think, more substantially change the Russian calculations than the incursion into Kursk. And the Ukrainians...
You're giving them advice.
Very
Glenn.
impressive, and are progressively doing this. They have almost succeeded in making the Crimea untenable for Russia. So it's not all going Russia's way. But the dynamic is, you have a behemoth and you have David. David sometimes will succeed with his sling, but throwing a sling is pretty hard to do accurately all the time.